I'm just waiting for some more people to arrive. I can see we've got people attending now, which is great. Just do a short introduction to today. My name is Fiona Slater, and I'm the Equality and Diversity Manager at the British Museum. And whilst we're waiting for people to arrive, we'll do a bit of a slow start. But just to say thank you for joining us today on Saturday afternoon. This is our second audio described talk, and this time we're focusing on Arctic culture and climate. So today we're joined by Lonny Evans, who is a VocalEyes audio describer, and curator Dr Peter Loovers. And just to give you a bit of an introduction to what an audio described talk is, if you're not familiar with the format, we're going to give you, or Lonny is going to give you, some visual descriptions of some of the key objects and images from this exhibition. And Dr Peter Loovers is going to give you some of the context and some more background information about these objects and how they relate to the themes of Arctic culture and climate. So usually we run these events inside the museum. We do it as a tour through the exhibition, but due to the current restrictions and not being able to have events or meet in groups, we're moving these events online. So great that you can join us over Zoom. We've done a few things which we hope will make this event more accessible for you. We've stopped the chat box, so there's no sort of chat through the event, but there is a Q&A button towards at the bottom of your screen. You should have a Q&A button, and if you have any questions through the event, just click on that box and you can type in your questions, and at the end of the event we're going to have some time to respond to those, so about 10-15 minutes to respond to those at the end. There's also captions, which is provided by Stagetext, so you should be able to click on the CC buttons and allow subtitles, and if you want to use the captions, that will pop up as well. What else is there to say? I just wanted to kind of give you a brief introduction, but I'll be coming back at the end just to facilitate the questions and answer session and to tell you about the next tours that we have in this series. So yeah, I'm going to hand over now just to say we're all at home. We're all in our respective homes in London, Brighton and Aberdeen. So we're spread out across the country, and we are happy to be joined with you from your respective homes. I'm going to hand over to Lonny now. She's going to give you an introduction to what to expect today, and I'll see you all at the end of the event.
Thanks, Fiona. Hi, everyone. It's Lonny Evans here, and I'm going to be your VocalEyes visual interpreter for the afternoon, offering descriptions of the images which we have on screen from the exhibition. Before I ask the curator, Peter Loovers, to introduce us to the themes of the show, Arctic culture and climate, I wanted to offer a description of the signature image from the show that's been used on a lot of the posters and promotional materials for the exhibition, and which is on our screens at the moment. Hopefully you might have the facility to zoom in on some of these photographs. Some of the photographs of the objects, we also have a zoomed in image that will come up second, which might make things a little easier. So let's describe this beautiful photograph, as I said, the signature image from the show. And it's a photo by Kilian Yuyan entitled Umiak and North Wind During Spring Whaling. And it was taken in 2019. The photograph is taken from the perspective of a fisherman sitting at the front of a narrow umiak, or skin boat, a little like a kayak. They seat about 3 fishermen. It shows only the pointed prow of the boat as it cuts a passage through blue water, surrounded by large chunks of white ice. From the triangular front section of the hunting vessel shown, there are indications of how the umiak was made. Essentially, animal hide, probably walrus or bearded seal, has been stretched and lashed over a driftwood frame. There are wooden poles tied to the inside of the craft's walls for pushing away ice floes, a curled rope and a harpoon attached to a hook at the prow. Historically, these boats were poled, paddled, or pulled, often on a sled by running dogs, but now by snowmobiles. And also, these boats can be turned upside down and used as a shelter in the event of bad weather. So very flexible and really kind of reflects the themes of the show, which I'm going to hand over to Peter to introduce us to.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lonny. So my name is Dr. Peter Loovers, and I'm the project curator for the Arctic exhibition. So I'll give a brief overview of the Citi exhibition, Arctic Culture and Climate. Central to the exhibition are the Arctic indigenous peoples. There are 40 different indigenous nations in the Arctic, with 400,000 Arctic indigenous peoples who live in 7 of the 8 Arctic states. Before I continue, allow me to acknowledge one of these nations, the Gwich'in, and especially the elders of Fort McPherson in the Canadian North, have been instrumental teachers in my introduction to the Arctic nearly 15 years ago. Now, how did an exhibition about the Arctic come to London, you might wonder? Dr. Jacob Cooper, head of the Americas, conceptualized an exhibition on climate change in the Arctic during his job interview. And this was as early as 2013, so 7 years ago. 3 years later, in 2016, Dr. Amber Lincoln joined the British Museum as curator for North America. As lead curator for the exhibition, she shaped the exhibition in its current form. Like my own experiences with indigenous peoples across the globe, Amber has worked extensively with indigenous people in Alaska, as well as visited indigenous community in Sapmi, which is the northern parts of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and a small part of Russia, Kola Peninsula, and the Sakha Republic, Siberia. These experiences guided us in bringing the Arctic to London through various collaborations with indigenous communities, institutions, and individuals. To them we express our gratitude. The exhibition addresses climate change through the lens of weather. We understand climate as an abstraction generated in models that can be measured, whereas weather is a lived experience. Weather, as our Arctic indigenous teachers and collaborators have emphasized, is essential in the Arctic for traveling, building, food, materials, and ceremonies. To this, we add that these lived experiences are seasonal, which, amongst others, distinguish 6 seasons with spring breakup of ice and freeze up of ice, in addition to the 4 seasons of winter, spring, summer, and autumn. These seasons entail also specific activities around traveling, hunting, fishing, picking berries or medicinal plants, trapping, gathering driftwood or cutting wood, or making artifacts. Now, this interplay between season and weather can also be traced back in the exhibition. The enormous platform along the main wall ought to offer the illusion of a vast outscape icy landscape with several sections away from the platform are made for as Arctic homes. The exhibition's design by Opera Amsterdam incorporates weather in the soundscape, where the visitor can hear, for example, the howling wind, cracking ice, birds or snowshoe going through the snow. Nearly all of the objects too tell a story about weather and seasonal lives. The visitor might ponder about the materials. The skins came from animals who were hunted at particular seasons to get the right material properties. The hunted animals would also provide food. So where does climate change come into play? As I mentioned before, Arctic culture and climate addresses climate change in a more nuanced way through the focus on weather and climate change and climatic shifts. We try to convey to the visitor how Arctic indigenous peoples, for over 32,000 years, have been coping with climate and have made hospitable homelands out of ecosystems of ice. Natural climate shifts, taking hundreds if not thousands of years, led to the receding Beringia landmass and rising sea levels. Human-induced climate change, however, has been much more recent and rapid. Within a generation, Arctic indigenous people have experienced drastic changes in seasonal patterns with erratic weather. Subsequently, as Quechan elders told me, or as Inupiat elder Delano Barr states in the exhibition, weather has become more unpredictable with devastating impact on their lives. Nonetheless, as we explore in the exhibition, Arctic indigenous peoples have used 4 similar strategies throughout history to combat change, namely adaptation, collaboration, resistance, and innovation. They have done this through ingenious technologies, which are plentiful to be found in the exhibition. And indeed, we will see a number of them this afternoon, or learn a few of them this afternoon. The theme of climate change might be more subtle than to some of the visitors' liking. Instead, we have examined for a balance between addressing the themes of climate change and weather and, importantly, to bring the visitor to the Arctic, which might be an exotic place for many, and transform their understandings of the Arctic, or the North as it is also known. Furthermore, we want to leave the visitor with a positive message, and perhaps something different than one might expect. So therefore, we deliberately have left out polar bears on floating ice. The message is that of hope, and to let the visitor ponder how they could incorporate Arctic people's strategies, again, adaptation, collaboration, innovation, and resistance, into their own lives, as well as think of ideas for sustainable living to reverse climate change. Embassy of Imagination, another of our indigenous collaborators, sums this up excellently. Their installation, Atechit Silapat, made of Japanese paper, parkas by children from 2 communities in Nunavut, at the end of the exhibition, is a testimony to hope and the crucial importance of the future generations. For that reason, they are calling, and I quote them here, calling for a reciprocal global action in solidarity during this time of transformation. End of the quote. Now, thank you, and hopefully we can welcome you at the British Museum and the exhibition. Now over to you, Lonny.
Thanks, Peter. The Arctic exhibition is very large. There's over 250 wonderful objects. We do urge you to visit the museum, which is now back open again, to experience it yourself. We have selected, as we've only got an hour with you today, we've selected 8 objects, one from each section of the exhibition, to tell the story, which Peter summed up so brilliantly there. And so let's talk a little bit about the style of the show. Peter referred to it a little bit there in his opening comments. It very much takes its influence from the weather and the region. The first room has a large circumpolar map on the floor, an invitation to perhaps to stand on top of the North Pole and encounter the world from this different perspective. I'm going to describe that circumpolar map in a moment. But throughout the exhibition, there are large wall-sized photos featuring the Arctic terrain. One section of the exhibition has a white floor and objects displayed on a long, low white platform lit with a blue glow that conjures a vast, icy outside landscape. And as Peter mentioned, there are various seasonal soundscapes playing throughout the exhibition, featuring the wind, melting ice, rivers, birds, snowmobiles, dogs, and Arctic animals. One section features those who collaborated on the exhibition and thanks them, and these include the indigenous Arctic leaders, scholars, artists, educators, hunters, herders, and seamstresses who generously shared their knowledge and story, and they really are at the forefront of this show. So let's talk a little bit about the circumpolar map. In a moment, I hope Fiona's going to change the photograph so that we have an image of it. There we go, thank you. So at the moment on screen, we have this wonderful map. This is actually on display, it's a smaller version on the wall. This isn't the one that's on the floor. And so we learn from this map that there are 8 nations with territory in the Arctic: Russia, the United States, Canada, Greenland or Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Iceland. This really useful map starts to show us the connections between some of these different peoples. It presents the circumpolar north, highlighting the spatial relationships of the Arctic peoples to one another and to the Arctic sea ice. There are about 40 different ethnic groups, and 24 are represented here on the map. The map also shows the rate at which the summer sea ice is predicted to melt over the next 100 years. The sea is shown as a pale blue, and the land masses are in beige, and the distinct ethnic groups in their lands are in different colors. At the center of the map, the limits of the Arctic Circle are shown by a circle of white dashes with the receding ice within the circle in different layers of gray and white to mark the passing years. In 1979, the ice is shown at its widest distribution, filling a large part of the circle, then receding to a small area by Greenland by the year 2100. So we get a sense of the scale of climate change affecting the far north. So we'll move on to section 2 of the exhibition, which is called Circumpolar Views. And here we have a part of the exhibition that reflects on the many different ethnic groups of the regions through their distinct national costumes. There are 9 costumes on display here, and I'm going to describe a really beautiful one that's on our screens at the moment, a photograph of which is on our screens at the moment. This is a young woman's sealskin costume from Eliot in West Greenland, and it was made in 1934. Worn on formal occasions, this national costume reflects a long history of connections between the Greenlanders, with the largest Inuit group, and global trade. It incorporates traditions like sealskin sewing with the embroidery, beading, and lacework of Northern Europe. This striking outfit is on display on a mannequin torso, as it would be worn. It consists of stripy sealskin shorts and a white blouse under a short red jacket. This is worn with a bead collar and long thigh-high white sealskin boots, decorated with flower patterns and lace. The boots are made from nalua, a type of cured sealskin, recognizable by its delicate papery white appearance. To make such intricate outfits, these professional seamstresses need numerous skills such as dyeing, cutting, and sewing tiny patches of sealskin, as seen on the boot trim. The sealskin shorts finish at the upper thigh, just before the top of the boot start. The shorts are made of a pale grey furry pelt, and they're decorated on each thigh by a vertical cream fabric stripe with coral-coloured satin borders and a central floral pattern. The boots fit snugly to the leg and have 3 sections. The lower part of the boot, up to about the knee, resembles cream leather with a brown sole, and this part of the boot is decorated by a horizontal stripe of bold patterning made of dyed sealskin. Above the knee, the boots have a white fabric section topped by white lace at the thigh. This section is embroidered with the repeat pattern of bold purple and red flowers on a green vine. And above this, there's a red fabric section topped by brown fur trim. The red woolen jacket is decorated by a horizontal satin border at the waist featuring gold, grey and pink stripes. The collar and cuffs have brown fur trim, and the sleeves are decorated by a single stripe of ornate beadwork at the wrist. There are 2 separate red knitted cuffs, a little like sporty wristbands. Because the red jacket is quite long at the neck, the only part of the blouse shown is the high white collar, which is embroidered with a delicate chevron pattern. Over the jacket is worn this beautiful yoke or beaded collar, which reaches from neck to chest. It's made from glass beads in red, blue, white, pink and brown, threaded into bold geometric patterns. There's a broad white zigzag at the collarbone, diamonds and triangles. Peter, this really is a marvellously fancy outfit, and we should stress this is for special occasions only, as I think the white sealskin probably wouldn't do very well in some of the more muddier conditions. But it shows a huge array of skills from the female makers of these Arctic peoples. That I think the seal skin has to be cured through organic processes. It has to be captured at a certain time, so it has enough time to cure. And so they're working with the seasons in a really interesting way.
Absolutely, they do. Yes, the like for example for the Nalawa, they would have used a young seal. Well, for the pens, it would have been again another kind of seal. So
yeah,
mm-hmm.
and so the beads that they would originally use would have been sort of things they could source from around them. So it would have been kind of bone or tusk, the bead, and then the traders. We're going to talk a little bit more about the influence of kind of European trade coming through in the 17th century. But they brought along these wonderful glass beads with them, which obviously the seamstresses thought, well, we'll use those to create this wonderful yoke. So it's a beautiful example of those two cultures coming together, really.
Yes, it is. And so the Greenlandic national costume itself is relatively recent, and it needs to be understood in the context of Inuit heritage, Danish nation building, and Greenland home rule in 1979. And kind of a fun fact, I suppose, is even the Queen of Denmark or the royal family of Denmark, when they come to visit Greenland, they would wear this kind of national costume. So the national costume itself incorporates the signs of the Kalalit, who live in Western Greenland, and the Tunumiit, who are in East Greenland. And from this one, you can see it as an East Greenland design. The ones from West Greenland, apologies. When you look at the East Greenland design, it is rather than this red, vibrant red, they are using in other occasions white. So it's a bit less vibrant, but still they use the short pants. They use the same Nalawa boots.
Yeah, I think I'm very covetous of these boots and shorts. I think this is a rocking outfit. But there's various other costumes on display showing this huge wealth of skill in using the right seal skin to, and putting it together with ligaments and sewing them. So all sorts of various skills. And there's a wonderful film in the exhibition showing some of the seamstresses at work. We're going to move on now to our next object, and we move into a different section here, which is called At Home with Ice. So as you mentioned earlier, for over 30,000 years, the indigenous peoples of the Arctic have made warm and hospitable homelands out of this ecosystem of ice, which is what they have in common in the region. There's a wonderful quote here. It was sent in 2015 from Sheila Watt-Cloutier, a member of the Nunavut. And she says, to live in a boundless landscape and a close-knit culture in which everything matters and everything is connected is a kind of magic. Like generations of Inuit, I bonded with the ice and snow. Let's move on to our second key object, which is a beautiful wooden freight sled and stick made by John Nuti, a member of the Swedish Sami, sometime before 1929. And we have an image of it on screen at the moment. This boat-shaped sled is over 1 meter long and made of dark birchwood planks. It's narrow in the center, about the width of a canoe, and has an upturned front and back section, almost like the prow and stern of a small dinghy. It has a horizontal rudder-like plank attached to the rear, which would have helped it stay upright. Sleds are designed for specific kinds of snow and ice, and the boat-like shape of this Sami sleds enables them to float through the deep powdery snows of Scandinavia. The birch sled was pulled by a single male reindeer, and displayed alongside it is a long wooden stick that herders used for balance and to direct the reindeer. The stick resembles a kind of elongated rolling pin with a cylinder-shaped center and a round club at either end. Peter, historically, the Sami traveled to their winter rangelands in convoys of these sleds, but the snowmobile and quad bike revolution has transformed their lives.
Yes, it has. So when we think about the sleds, like, for example, this Sami sled, one can think about the different styles of modes of transportation, and also the differences with the sleds both in Sapmi, in Sami, the land of the Sami, or with the Nenets, or in Siberia, or the question I've been working with. So this sled, as Lonny was mentioning, was kind of narrow, so it was quite movable, going through the soft snow, through the trees. Now, more recently, like the question, they were using dog sleds, and these are also related. The shapes and the sizes are also related to fur markets and capitalist markets. By the entry of the snowmobile and the quad bikes, and even the Sami in particular, are using helicopters for herding in certain cases. So it's
Right.
very big changes, and that has led to different use of sleds as well. The question, they still use their dog sled, but they just modified it in a way that it can be pulled by a snowmobile, whereas this one has become obsolete.
Right. So we're going to kind of finish this section looking at some workshops with young members of, I think, it's the Nunavut community, who are kind of trying to pass on some of the ancient skills. And I think, you know, see that sled building needs to be kept in case your snowmobile runs out of fuel, I would imagine. I don't know.
Yeah, well, like in my own work. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to move on now. Actually ties in with the sled. Our next key object is in a section which thinks about seasonal lives, and Peter mentioned at the beginning the seasonality of the year, the circularity of the year. So there's times of abundance and leaner times. So obviously. And we're going to be thinking about that. And here we're going to focus on the Nenets, nomadic reindeer herders from Siberia, who follow the annual migration of their reindeer, traveling hundreds of kilometers between their summer and their winter rangelands. When we think of the far north, we imagine the Arctic as a sort of a barren kind of white wasteland, but summer's continuous daylight and melting of the snow brings a real abundance of plants and animals, and Arctic people thrive by harnessing this abundance to carry them through the winter. So a photograph of this lovely winter reindeer camp is on screen at the moment, and we'll have a little close-up photograph appearing in a moment. And it's a large, detailed model of a North Siberian reindeer camp in winter, and it was made in the Yamal Peninsula, Russia, in the late 19th or early 20th century. The model's made from cream-coloured mammoth ivory, and it also uses wood, metal, pigment, hide, and paper. It's set on a base platform which is 43 by 69 centimetres long and made up of individual rectangular blocks, a little like a chessboard. The camp features a large central tent that resembles a wigwam called a chum, with a similar smaller tent to the left, which has been built for a birth event. These two tents are surrounded by 14 tall trees, and the camp is crowded with model animals and sleds and individual male and female herders dressed in their warm winter clothes, engaged in various separate life events. The tall, sparse trees are made of a single slender piece of bone with a few green pigmented leaves attached. Each tree has a large brown bird sitting directly on top of it, and there are other bits of green vegetation sprouting up from the white ground. The tents have a cone of tall central wooden poles covered by reindeer skins, which are stitched together in squares, a little like a patchwork quilt. In the large tent, herders are drinking and fighting, whereas in the smaller one, a woman is in the process of giving birth. Various scenes are taking place. It's a very busy scene. In front of the tents, some herders are doing business with a Russian fur trader who's arrived by sled. There are reindeers in harnesses and others at rest, while close by, one reindeer is forced to kneel by a hunter with a raised knife. There's a drinker raising a bottle and a man with a bow and arrow, another with a dog and gun. A lady cradles a newborn baby, and elsewhere a couple celebrate with arms raised. On the right, there are hunting scenes, one bear stabbed with a spear and another standing upright with something in its paws, while two hunters take aim. Peter, this lovely model details the lives of these reindeer herders in winter, but also I think speaks to us of the person who crafted it, possibly in winter, when outside activities are limited. Someone possibly turned to carving the scene that was around them. It's very vibrant and alive, this scene of the camp.
Yeah, so my personal thought on it, like it's not quite known who was the carver, but my personal thought is that it must have been, or it could likely have been master ivory carvers from a small community just south from the Nennet Peninsula called Kolmogauri. And they were well-known carvers working sometimes for the imperial Russian courts. And they're known for these really beautiful depictions of life.
Yes. So there's lots going on, but it draws our attention too also to the reindeer herds themselves. And there's a lovely part of the exhibition where it details exactly how many different things the reindeer is used for once it's been killed. So it's all sorts of materials, not a piece of the reindeer is wasted. There's tents, fishing line, parkas, socks, trousers, thread, sleeping bags and mattresses, kayaks, drums, harpoon lines, bows and arrows, caribou hide, binding and struts, mittens, boots, bags. It's really the sort of livelihood is just centered around the reindeer. And as we said, the chums, the tents themselves are made from the reindeer hide, which would keep out the cold.
Yes, absolutely. Reindeer are essential for reindeer herding families on multiple levels. Both the material, like that you sums up so neatly, the food, of course, and also more on the spiritual sides. Like there are stories of the lasso, for example, that is very an important tool for the men and for the women, and there are particular rules to go about it. So you're not allowed to step over a lasso. So it also has some of these properties, those things that you were mentioning, also have these kind of sentience or agency, if you like.
Yeah. So it keeps the agency of the animal in the object.
Yeah, correct, and keeps this kind of luck as well, and the well-being. It's so, and this model shows also this sense of community and this togetherness that are really fundamental in these so-called nomadic camps.
And how often would they move, Peter? How often would this camp move? I think it's quite regularly, isn't it, that the whole thing would be struck and moved up on?
Yeah, and it's what you mentioned, that is indeed seasonal. So you've got these long travels, and the Nenets are in particular well known. So they would travel hundreds of kilometers going from the south, so from the forested area, back up to the coast. And the coast is where there's a lot of wind. So during summertime, when there's also a lot of mosquitoes, it would drive away the mosquitoes, and it would be much more pleasant for the caribou to graze. And then they would move back down inland again during the winter times and gather around these camps.
So we're moving on to a lovely section, which is about embracing the weather. Now, I think this is really key. And when I was researching for this exhibition, this was really, really struck me as something that perhaps I could take on in my own life, which is kind of not being having any resistance to bad weather, but seeing all the positives in it. and which I found really a kind of lovely little perspective on things. And it's something the Arctic peoples have always had, this profound relationship with the weather, which is not viewed as an obstacle, as I said, that must be resisted or overpowered, but as a tool to be harnessed. So wind, precipitation, humidity, temperature, all have properties that can be used to make life easier for the individual. The wind, for example, dries food, aids transportation, helps navigation. So it's seen in a very positive light. And that brings us to our next object, which is a north wind mask made by the Upeit of Western Alaska. And an image of the mask is on screen at the moment. This is a large mask. It's just over 1 meter high and 1/2 meter wide, and it's predominantly made of worn dark brown wood with added paint, metal, and leather parts. The mask consists of a large oval-shaped wooden face with a gaping mouth containing blunt wooden pegged teeth which are spaced out around it. Above the lips are wide open nostrils and big round holes for eyes. The eyes have raised circular rims and round pupils made of small wooden balls which are threaded and suspended inside the eye space. Fixed to the chin of the mask and projecting outwards is a section of wide wooden tubing. Either side of this and projecting sideways from the chin are 2 identical wooden cutouts that resemble small hands. The top of the mask is framed by 2 circlets of wood, like a double halo, held in place by threaded leather. And projecting from the top of these pieces is another piece of curved wood that is bowed forward, and this has 4 oval wind chimes dangling from it. The north wind spirit portrayed in the mask preferred windy storms, and such weather conditions would have been made audible when this mask was danced. The rattle of the wood from the top pieces might conjure the sound of objects thrown about in a storm, and air blowing through the tube. The mouthpiece would evoke the howling winds. Peter, after the Christian conversion, I think the Upeit abandoned mask dancing, I read, for roughly about 60 years, but never abandoned this awareness, or as you said earlier, this sort of sentience that they ascribe to weather properties. And the winds are still honored as a gift.
Yeah, that's correct. So the Upeit, well, due to missionary work, they were, so these mask dances were considered as devilish heathen work. So by the 60s, 1960s, the Upeit, they returned back to this dancing, a revitalization or a reawakening of this. In the meantime, the wind continued to be considered. I mean, throughout this time and across the Arctic, the wind is something that is sentient, has a volition. Any action towards bad, so bad actioning towards animals, for example. So if you kill a raven, which is a powerful being, can cause a terrible storms, bad weather. If you're hunting and you don't properly deal with the bones of the animals, then again this could be turned into bad weather. So in order to favor like this sentience, people would indeed bring offerings, or in the olden days, like with the Upeit, would dance to the wind to call this weather. And then this one in particular is interesting, that as you mentioned, Lonny, they would use this one in particular at the start of the winter. So when you think about the Bering Strait, or if you think about Alaska, the Bering Sea, there are massive autumn storms which are very strong, and they can erode the coastline, as it's happening now. But in the olden days, the spiritual leader or shaman would summon up the wind and the cold weather, which then would generate a freezing ice frozen sea, which then would protect the communities from these autumn storms.
Right. Yeah, we're going to move sort of slightly back in time now, but it's another group of people who were affected by an early weather event as we move into a section called Climates of the Past. And this section considers Arctic history. It's really interesting in certain respects that some of the areas of permafrost are melting and new discoveries are being made about the ancient peoples. Our next object was made by the Dorset, who were early Arctic peoples living in North America over 1,000 years ago. And our focus here is a miniature sculpture, an ivory figure that depicts a man carrying a child on his shoulders. It's only 5 centimeters tall, really tiny, and is carved from walrus ivory. Artists use special microblades or burins made of chert, a substance called chert, to work on these tiny detailed pieces. The small cream-coloured ivory sculpture is yellowed and worn, a little brown in places. It shows a bare adult without discernible genitalia. The figure has chunky thighs and a rounded belly with distinct facial features clearly delineated. And the man's hands are raised, holding the hands of the child on his shoulders. So it's really a timeless image. And there's a second similar walrus ivory piece shown in the exhibition next to this piece, which has the child standing up on the adult's shoulders. Peter, it's not known whether these sculptures were toys, mementos, charms, or what role they played in the Dorset culture or spiritual practices, but they certainly do focus in on those little domestic moments, which I think is really charming. But I believe they disappeared, the Dorset peoples, of around 700 years ago.
Yeah, that's correct. So it's kind of a mystery why they exactly disappeared. So by 1350, all the Dorsets, or in fact, they're also known as Tunuit. So the Inuit history or historians have always spoken about these people, the Tunuit, the Dorset people, that were very large. They were massive, big people, extremely strong. They could drag a walrus across the ice. So you can imagine how strong they were. But they were at the same time also very fragile and shy. So one of the thoughts or theories that are now here is that because of the Thule, so the Inuit ancestors, that they came into the area of the Tunuit, of the Dorset people, and they displaced them. They were much more aggressive, and they took over their community. At the same time, also the weather was warming up, so the climate was warming. There was a climate shift, and some argue that the Tunuit or the Dorset people were unable to deal with these warming weathers, so they disappeared. So it's and then the same, one of the reasons why these small miniatures, which is quite, I've been puzzled by it. So you have these really big people, but they have make really minuscule artifacts, objects, and they think one of the reasons they made those, and this is what lead curator Amber Lincoln is writing in the Arctic Expedition catalog, is that because it might have had to do with that they were looking back to the spiritual world. They were asking for maybe protection against this warming weather or climate, but mainly also against the Thule people, so the Inuit ancestors.
Right.
So that's one of the thoughts.
So, and it's interesting, it ties in with our reindeer camp, this carving of these little intricate, beautiful pieces. And there's a lovely quote from the exhibition from an Alaskan elder, and they say they carved figures during storms so the bad weather wasn't wasted. I think that's a lovely thought. So we're going to move on to one of my favorite objects out of this selection, which is a Bering Strait map. And this is our penultimate object. It's a sealskin map of the Bering Strait, which is a narrow sea passage between the easternmost point of Russia and the westernmost point of North America. The map was made between 1860 and 1865. The large piece of pale, bleached sealskin is over 1 meter in circumference and has an uneven shape with several edges coming to a point like a star. On the map, in black pigment, contours are drawn around the margins which represent the coastlines of Siberia on the left and Alaska on the right, enveloping the Bering Strait in the center. At sea and also on land, the circular map details the events going on in each different area, including whaling and walrus hunting, reindeer herding, spiritual activities, some armed conflicts, and also trading with visiting ships. These busy action scenes in black ink show vessels and figures simply drawn, almost like stickmen. The map allegedly details the annual journeys of Chief Teo, who was a Siberian Yupik whaling captain and trader who traveled extensively throughout this area, witnessing warfare and visiting the indigenous trade fairs. The map is beautifully detailed and crammed full of small illustrations and figures, almost too numerous to mention, but we'll try. On the land, it details various settlements, such as those at Providence Bay and St. Lawrence, and a large lobe of land drawn on the left side of the map represents the village at Indian Point. The map marks where trading took place by depicting Western sailing ships alongside native kayaks at anchorage, and there are scenes of daily life from the Chukchi, who are reindeer herders, so village shamans, bear hunts, herding. The sea itself is crammed with illustrations, including various fishing vessels and whaling schooners, and scenes of hunting for bowhead whales, grey whales, beluga whales, walruses, and seals. It's this really full, busy imagery. Peter, I really loved this map. So the age of the map indicates shows us really that there were lots of different groups were all using the region's trade network by this time, and it presented some new opportunities, but also prompted some conflict and resistance.
Yeah, this is a beautiful map. I completely agree. So there are 5 different European ships on this map, 3 masters and two masters, if I'm correct, and my memory doesn't fail. So this map is really an illustration how the Bering Strait had become part of the Russian Empire as well as the American empire. So yeah, these American whalers that came and moved, and British explorers, and then the Russian officials. So when you speak about the conflict, if you think a little bit south, at this stage, the entire map was part of the Russian Empire. So Russian America, Alaska now, and then you had Chukchi, Siberia. The Russian Empire, what they did was they brought Eliot hunters so they were living a little bit more south, but they brought them to different islands to hunt for fur seals. And some of them might have been, joined up with the whalers as part of this whaling cruise. And in this area in the Bering Sea, the American whalers, they became known as being quite well, they were hunting a lot of whale. Let's say it that way.
Yeah.
So that caused some conflict, but at the same time, you had these notions of wintering, and wintering meant that the whaling ships would winter over in this region. So they would freeze up the ship, and then their ship would be a kind of a house on ice, if you would like to think of that way. And there Inuit would come and they would trade with the whalers. And in what you were saying, yeah, it was all tied up on these longer indigenous trading routes. And this particular area, like you can think about it in ways that's at least since 13,000 years ago, people came across this area. So it's
that was the thing that interested me the most, and from this exhibition was just the way the maps show how close Russia and North America are. And this, I think it's 53 miles, if I'm correct, if I've remembered that correctly. But and this little map is just this little patch, but it's the very small gap between these continents, and all teeming with all this incredible kind of activity. And we've got a little close up on our screens, and now it shows you the work that's gone into creating the map. We're slightly running out of time, so we're going to quickly move on to our next object. So we've got time to take a few of your questions. Our final object is talking about collaborations. It's a reflection. The final section of the exhibition reflects on climate change and showcases works by the Embassy of Imagination, Peter referred to briefly at the beginning, which is a socially engaged art practice from Toronto, working in collaboration with young artists and knowledge keepers from the Nunavut communities. So the project produced a range of beautiful printed silaupas, which are kind of thin parkas made from washi, which is a Japanese paper. The image we have on screen at the moment shows a close-up of a kid-sized paper parka, and in the exhibition this is hanging with about 9 others. In this photo, the parka appears to float just above a layer of crisp, icy snow. It's hung from on high with, as I said, several others at the exhibition. The translucent paper jacket is single-layered with a generous hood that comes to a point and wide sleeves. The seams show as dark lines where one part connects to the next, and the parka is printed with blocks of colour which contain linoleum etchings of patterns and seascapes. The coloured ink blocks on the semi-transparent material almost glow in the light. It's very vibrant. There are broad stripes of red at the sleeve, and similar decoration on the hood is marked with curvy lines and circles that almost resemble an ice floe. There are mustard yellow broad stripes at the shoulder, and the front bib is decorated with a jumble of blue and yellow stripes with a swathe of vertical wavy lines in earthy brown print. The artwork engages the craft of starch strengthened paper, which visually references the original traditional material, which would have been a translucent seal gut used by the Inuit for these traditional garments. And we finish with an image of a group of young people who were engaged on a similar project to sew, print and colour some hooded parkas. The 7 young adults are modelling their slightly thicker parkas, which are made of cloth in this case. They're gathered in the corner of a crafting studio, a row of people standing at the rear and several students kneeling at the front, along with 2 teaching elders who are dressed in their own clothes. 4 of the students are wearing thick padded white parkas with hoods up, and 3 are wearing bright yellow parkas, which are printed with these gorgeous large animal prints in red onto the front of the yellow parkas. And there's lots of smiles. So Peter, we talked a little bit about wanting people coming to the show, leaving feeling with a sense of hope that we can somehow come together, tackle this together. Is that the way you wanted people to feel as they were leaving?
Exactly, and yeah, like I mentioned, so their message is the one of reciprocal solidarity and to take action. So within the design of the exhibition, we didn't want to. We wanted to address climate change, but not make it too heavy loaded that people are feeling disempowered. So these collaborations are key in Arctic people's lives, and I think that's shown in all the objects that that we discussed today. And maybe the map before this one was a very good example. So there's always been these collaborations between Arctic peoples across the Arctic, and also with other people. So when we think about climate change and what actions we can do, it also is about thinking about how our lives can be how we can change our lives sustainably. So within the Arctic, the use of materials like the reindeer, using every part of the reindeer, for example, is one of these other examples. Or indeed engaging with these partnerships and learning from other people and bringing those teachings into your own lives could be a good way forward.
Absolutely. Fiona, would you like to step in now if there's any questions? We've got about 5 minutes.
Yeah, so yeah, if people want to ask questions, there is a button at the bottom of your screen for question and answers, so do type in there. We have had one question which is just relating to how the closure of the museum, and obviously COVID has affected this exhibition, which has kind of come slap bang in the middle of all this sort of change. So just how has it changed the exhibition, or maybe the planning for it? So I don't know, Peter, if you want to take that one.
Yeah, so Lonny was referencing this large print of caribou and with all the different materials. So pre-COVID-19, our intention was to have this very tactile experience and the smells. So people were able to come and they would be able to touch reindeer skin. Children were able to turn and be playful with materials in the way that is essential in the Arctic. So all these things were impossible. And then we lost an important Russian loan, which would have illustrated the mammoth, the start of mammoth carving in the Arctic 32,000 years ago. So that was a big change. And now, of course, with also we have to be more careful now with the amount of visitors that are coming in. So there are more limits on this, and so these are some of the big changes.
Yeah.
But overall, we're lucky. I think we have been in a way lucky that we have been, a lot of the loans were able to come to into the exhibition. So in that sense, we've been fortunate.
Great.
And I think we've all learnt that we have to adapt, which is one of the messages of the show, isn't it? Which of the exhibition, which is adapting to ever-changing situations with resilience. So yeah. And
being innovative. So then we changed around some of the designs and.
Yeah, and just to remind people that the museum and this exhibition is open again, isn't it? So people can book tickets and come and experience the exhibition for themselves. And there's another comment which is just to say that people want some, or this particular person would like some more images of the actual exhibition, which I think we haven't got so many of the actual installation. So if people are interested in seeing the exhibition or want a bit more information or want to have some of these images, then you can email access@britishmuseum.org.uk, and I'll happily sort of send some more things through to you if you felt that there was another question or something else that you wanted to get from this presentation and event today. And I suppose just probably to wrap up, really, to say that we're going to have a feedback form which will pop up at the end of this event on your screen, so a SurveyMonkey form. So if you are able to fill that out, that's really appreciated, just because it helps us to, as I said, this is only our second audio described tour online, so we're really keen to improve these and work out the best way of doing these events. So do take time to feedback if you can. We're going to have another audio described tour, which will be on the 13th of January. It's not yet up on the website, but that will be a similar audio described event of room 33 of the South Asia collection. So we have Di Langford, who is a VocalEyes audio describer, with Shushma Jansari, who is a curator for that part of the collection. So I'll be emailing people as a reminder. It will also be up on our website. If people want to be added to our mailing list so you can get information and updates on these types of events, then the email address is access@britishmuseum.org.uk. But I think we're kind of up to time now, so I'm just going to say thank you very much to Dr. Peter Loovers for all your insight into the exhibition and how it's come together, and to Lonny Evans for providing that beautiful visual description of all the images. So, and thank you all for coming and spending time with us on this Saturday afternoon. So,
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.